And I believe in the town hall we do have Brian and we have Steve. Steve, don't know if you want to pop on camera or audio here.
I'm not really sure where I gotta stand here yet.
He's got to jump between our tables to. Well,
You'll be able to hear him because he's right behind the laptop.
Planning board or ZBA, Steve?
Planning board.
Okay, so this is our first meeting. I gave a memo to Brian to distribute roughly a month and a week ago, and I hope you've all had a chance to look at that. Let me talk a little bit about the process so you know where we are and where we're going. I've done this now in over 100 cities and towns. Probably the biggest town I've done is Worcester, and I did Lowell, Salem, New Bedford, plenty of cities. Always fun to work in a city. Quincy, and then at small end of things, I've done Mount Washington, which has 300 people in the corner of Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. Also, a bunch of places out in the Berkshires. I was just out in the Berkshires with my family, and I couldn't go through a town where I didn't write the zoning for a while. All the way from Alford to Great Barrington to Sheffield, up Route 7 to Lenox and Lee. Those are all towns that I've worked in the past. So the point is that I've gotten a lot of on-the-ground experience with people and their problems, and the good news is I don't have to take it home with me because it's your town, not mine. But I will try to help you solve the problem. So I generally approach this with a really systematic way of doing things. The first memo is the one you've already got. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but it's really just a way to get introduced to each other and get the ball rolling. At the next meeting, I will have already given you, in fact, I prepared it today, a memo on Section 1, Section 2. Those are real handshakes. The Section 1 is the purpose authority section of the bylaw. Section 2 is the districts. I'm not adding or subtracting districts. Section 5, which is the ZBA's bailiwick on non-conforming uses and structures. And then Section 10, which is everybody's job description. So it's building commissioner, and if we can get the building commissioner to come, I can jiggle the meeting around so that if he has something else to do, he can hear my thoughts and then leave. But also, Section 10 covers things like ZBA powers, planning board powers, particularly site plan, special permit, and variance discussion. And then there's a couple of little doodads that I've added at the end that I think every town should have. Site plan review for Dover amendment uses, and something that governs requests for reasonable accommodations, because you never know when you're going to get in trouble with somebody seeking to open a drug-related facility for drug and alcohol recovery under the federal disability laws. It's a painful mistake if you make it. So that's next meeting. The meeting after that, I'll have prepared definitions to match the use table, and I view it as a free-for-all to discuss your current use table. If you've got holes in it that didn't keep up with the last 20 years, and there's been a lot that's happened in the last 20 years, this is the time to try to fill the hole. I was giving an example to the town manager yesterday. We had a staff level meeting, and I've been Berkeley's land use lawyer for 26 years, and like everybody else, they're looking for intersections where they can put logistical facilities, because it means $600,000-$700,000 in property tax for the community that hosts that. We tried to do that at the Myrick's intersection on Route 140. Whether or not it pans out, they did give the permits out. Whether or not the permittee will defend the appeal is anybody's guess. But they tried to build some resource into the zoning bylaw. The fourth meeting out, we'll talk about everything residential, from cluster development to home occupations to accessory dwelling units, if you're interested in the governor's housing bill from 2020. And at the last meeting of the 5, we'll talk about non-residential. I went through today with great painstaking detail your objectives that are buried in your site plan review. I pulled it out. I'm going to make that a section that goes with parking, landscaping, lighting, and signs, because it's more of a set of performance standards than it really is guidance for site plan. I'll just incorporate it by reference into the site plan section that you'll see. It was pretty impressive, from traffic all the way through lights to design criteria for different sections in town. At the end of that, I put the whole thing together. I put the whole thing together in a first draft. The first draft is color coded, so if it's new, it's yellow. If it's black, you had it already. If it's strike through, I didn't like it, and we've collectively decided that it can go. And after the first draft, we have a meeting, we go through it. That leads to the second draft. The second draft is all in. Sometimes I don't put things in the first draft that are just merely going to be renumbered. Water Resource Protection District, I'm not going to do much with that other than put it in a different place. The second draft has everything in it, and again, it's color-coded. And I keep color-coding every draft of the bylaw all the way up to the planning board public hearing. At that point, I've had enough. But if somebody wants to say, hey, neighbor, what did you do? I can just toss it in their lap, and they can look at it, and if they have any questions, they can get back. I'm under contract for 3 drafts. I'm not naive enough to think we're going to be done in 3 drafts. Bridgewater took 18 drafts, and it took them 4 years. So at some point in time, if it gets a little bit unwieldy from the financial end on my side, I'll probably say you should pay me a meager sum per hour to finish the job. But I'm not even going to mention that until I get to draft 10, so maybe we won't get there. Sharon got to 6 drafts last year, and we were done. It worked out just fine. Town meeting passed it. And I know you had Maria briefly as your planner. It was a good experience. So that's sort of the lay of the land. I try to give you a memorandum at least a week in advance. If I can do it longer before that, I will. I know you're busy and you need some time to read these things. So having said that, we're headed for a fall town meeting next year, and plenty of time for me to get a full draft out in advance. Certainly we'll get draft 1 out probably, I would say, May 15th at the latest. And that gives us time in the working year before everybody goes on vacation to kind of lay the groundwork for the fall town meeting. I'm going to rely on you. This is a really important point. I work with who they send me. So, hi tonight. I'm glad to have all of you. You need to decide amongst yourselves what core committee I'm going to be working with. If it gets too big, it's really unwieldy for me to listen to somebody who's got an agenda. I don't know whether that's everybody's agenda. I don't know whether I should just plug it up and hope for the best. But I need specific instructions sometimes. It can be something relatively simple, like I'm still waiting for Wakefield to tell me I'm doing them at the same time. I'm still waiting for them to tell me whether or not they're going to allow use variances or not. I get a shout over here, yes. I get a shout over there, no. That's not guidance for me. That's just chaos. So I need to be working with a committee that has a defined liaison that I can reach out to if I've got questions, and also that I can rely on to distribute stuff locally. I'm going to obviously work with staff to do some of that, but collectively you need to come up. I would say that the ideal committee for me is something in the range of 5 people. And if I had somebody from the planning board and somebody from the zoning board, that would be beautiful. But anything that works for you works for me. I don't have a dog in the race. You tell me what you think will work, because I'm going to be relying on you to stun the voters at town meeting, shock and awe them with the work that we've done over the course of the next 6-8 months. And I'm happy. Whatever works for you works for me.
So,
all right, so let me go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. For the committee, Mike had sent out an email within the last half hour, I believe, to Tim and Tom, asking them if they wanted to be a part of the department committee or such. So I was just going to suggest that to the boards present, if that would be the good amount of group continuing or whatnot. So
yeah, Tom here. I didn't know the extent to which that was different than what we were doing tonight, so I'm just a little confused by the email. Is that what Mark is suggesting now, a core group? I mean, there are only 5 of us here, I think, at this point, or 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure what he was asking, but I can circle back with Mike on what he intended. And certainly, I'm here. I'm going to do what I can, and glad to have Jim. And by the way, another member, Lucas, showed up at the media center, I guess. He may be going to town hall now, I don't know, or he may be signing on remotely in a few minutes, but he was at the media center. So, we've only got a core group at the zoning board anyway at this point. So thanks, Jim, for being here with me, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it for you folks to just get back to me. You've heard my spiel, and I'm sure you'll do the right thing. So.
Okay. And the contacts being, I assume, would be Laura and Brian Carmichael.
Yep.
Okay.
Can I share screen?
Yeah.
You should be able to, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to just put my memo up and what the hell it is. Huh. I thought I had put it up on the screen here. Hang on. All right, here we go.
Yep.
So this is what I circulated to everybody, and I'm just going to run through it. Just stop me. I got on a roll, and you'll have to interrupt me, and it's fine with me. So generally what I usually shoot for, in special circumstances this wouldn't apply, but I don't think it applies in your case. The ultimate format here is going to look something like this. I think your bylaw is pretty good. It seems comprehensive, but it jumps around. And I know how that happens. Something gets enacted in the clerk or the national code just plugs it wherever they feel like it. But I create a chapter format. So chapter 1, purpose authority, again, it's just a handshake. 2, districts. I did it today. I didn't change anything. Then use regulations. I see you've got a nice use table. I'm going to go through that and make whatever changes I think we should make. Same with dimensional regulations. Nonconformities, I typically tear up what you have and go with something that I know well works. And it's the black hole of the Zoning Act, so I like to spend a little bit of time on it with the ZBA, especially explaining my thoughts and how I anticipate it might work well for you. And then general regulations, signs, parking, lighting, special residential or non-residential, that would be adult uses. I don't recall seeing adult uses in your bylaw. Did I miss that?
We do have it.
You do or you don't?
He said yes.
Okay. Well, I certainly didn't see any regulations. I might have missed it in the use table, but and then special residential, that would be things like estate lots, multifamily. You've got a cluster bylaw. I want to know how those are working, and I might be able to offer something that would work a little bit better. Special districts, I see you've got a floodplain district and a water resource protection district. Everybody's job description is chapter 10, and then definitions I put at the back. So my general approach for definitions is to make it a glossary. That way, if I'm picking up your bylaw for the first time, I can just look to the back 3 pages and I'm going to hit definitions, and I can just adjust from there. If I got to go looking in the middle of the bylaw somewhere, it's going to take more time. I'm trying to make this as user-friendly for the average citizen, not just the people who work with it, as possible. Typically what I like to do for parking, loading, screening, and signage, and I think those are probably the big ones, is create a special permit relief mechanism. I see you've got something like that already that would allow a person seeking to develop their property to get let's say they're working on a widget factory, and the widget factory and the parking table calls for 65 spaces, but they think they can get by with 45, and the 20 that they're being required to put under asphalt are a waste of time. Come to us, show us why you think that, ask for a second special permit, and that can be adjusted by special permit, as long as it's not going to cause any detriment to the neighborhood or to the town. And the same thing is true, especially for signs. If you want a bigger sign or more signs because of the peculiar circumstances of your property, ask. Instead of holding you to a standard that's not meant to apply to everybody, we can give you a special permit, again, if it's not going to cause detriment either to the town or to the neighborhood. And those, I think, I try to build in business-friendly things to the zoning bylaw as well as neighborhood-friendly things in terms of protecting the neighborhood from unwanted intrusion. But where you can, it should be a partnership with everybody getting the best of the world here. So, I don't know how many of you have a copy of the bylaw with you. I usually recommend that you flip through it when I'm going through it to sort of read along. I did the first section today, so I substituted a better purpose clause. You listed a few things, one of which I don't like, which is the protection of property values. If you do that, you've given everybody in town standing to apply to sue any permit winner on the basis of the unproven fact that the property is going to go down in value if the thing next door gets built. And it's caused a lot of trouble in recent years. The Supreme Judicial Court has said that property value as a claim for standing, you have to show injury for standing, that property values must be tethered, their words, not mine, to a zoning related injury like traffic noise or lights or litter or parking or whatever. So the argument would be your lights are going to be so bright, I will suffer injury, and it will be so bad that my property values will go down. But you always have to have the primary injury first and property values as a secondary injury, unless you put it in your bylaw as a protected interest in the purpose clause. And you don't, I don't think it's worth doing that. Believe me, I spend 3/4 of my time defending people who got permits, and they're now fighting off neighbors who are really, in most instances, they don't even know what they're doing, let alone doing it right. So that can be painful. I've got a client out in Oxford who is ready to build and operate a 450,000 square foot warehouse. You've got 3 neighbors that don't like him. They don't have standing. I've taken their depositions. In my opinion, they don't have standing. There's no injury, but it's held the case up for a year. Imagine being held up for the last year. The carrying cost increase, the burden that's been placed on his lending ability to borrow. I've got good clients that have worked with banks for 30 years, and they're being told right now that their construction mortgage is 9.5%. It might come down a little bit as we go along, but that's a hell of a place to find yourself with a lot of money invested and more needed. So there has to be a balance somewhere. So otherwise, this is what the state adopted in 1976 as suggested purposes to the Zoning Act, and you can see in here it's pretty comprehensive: use of land, height, bulk structures, protection of water bodies, noxious use prevention. I think I've taken out protection of property values already. Density of population, accessory facilities, scenic aesthetic quality protection, and there's my warning about locally protected interests. The other one that's really always an issue is view. View is not a protected interest under case law, but if you include view as a locally protected interest by saying that everybody has the right to a good view, then you've invited people to sue on the basis of loss of view. And in the case Monks versus Plymouth, the neighbor was found to have a protected interest in it was a tower of some sort between their house and the water. I don't think it ever got built.
Mark?
Yep.
Question. Very interesting that you're saying we've provided standing based on diminishment of property value. I don't think view is in there. If we take that out, or take these out, or keep them out, does that affect our ability to take those things into consideration in our decisions on variances, for example?
That's a good question. Let's put it into a special permit context. When I show, here's the list of special permit criteria that I usually recommend, and those are, I've used these for 30 years. I permitted Legacy Place with the Dedham Planning Board using this. Under things like impacts on the natural environment, that's pretty broad. I mean, that could be drainage, it could be stormwater management, it could be lights, it could be noise, it could be, anything, including view. I mean, the view is part of the natural environment, so I think it's a factor that can be considered there. But it's not called out, and I think that's the big difference. Traffic flow and safety, including parking and loading, a little bit more precise, but I think you're entitled to look at, you're certainly entitled to look at future impacts from other projects that have already got a permit but are not yet constructed. I mean, that's pretty much what a TIAS does. It lists known projects. So I like to keep it general instead of specific. And I can just tell you that it's enormously frustrating to get what you want. And the community has agreed with you because they've given you the permit. And now it's 5 years. Because that's what can happen.
I suppose potential economic impact could encompass our view or our questioning an abutter. Is it? I mean, they come to us all the time with I'm concerned about my property value. It's usually in relation to some flooding issue or something like that.
Yeah.
But
now, see, that would be okay.
Yeah.
If there's proof that the stormwater management system isn't going to work, and it would also, in addition to flooding, result in a diminution in property value, that's fine. That's my point.
So that was a bad example. All I'm saying is that we as a board try to be fair.
Yeah.
The general issue of fairness to abutters who object and to the permit seeker. And oftentimes the abutter will say, it's going to reduce my property value. Our response is often, well, that's speculation, really. If you can show us that, that's okay. But we try to consider it. We try to pay it honor, some degree of honor and respect, and talk about it. That's all I'm getting at.
I think that's fine. But I read every case every year, and I have for 32 years, 33 years. I wrote a book, 1992, it came out, first edition. It's in its sixth edition now, the Handbook of Massachusetts Land Use and Planning Law. And around 1992, the appeals court decided a case in which they called a spade a spade. There were people in Newton that were complaining about a multifamily complex. And they took the witness stand and they testified, the tennis balls would make too much noise. And the court said, that's not evidence. That's
right.
I think they called it angst insufficient for standing. And since then, we've seen a number of cases that have really amplified that sentiment at the court, to the point where in the land court, I just finished reading the last 6 months of land court cases, I would say that the average 6-month period has at least 50% of the people who have sued getting dismissed for lack of standing. We're not talking about the rare case here. And lawyers have learned since 1992 to go after the standing of people because the case ends if you don't have standing. So this is not a minor issue. It's a big issue, especially once it goes to the arena of litigation. It's really crucial. And if you truly are injured, God bless you. You should have your rights. Nonconformities, as I said yesterday, is probably the section where the bylaw touches 75% of the readers. Because like most towns, I'm sure, I used to live next door in Mansfield. I think when I bought my house in 1991, they had rezoned the district to 30,000. By the time 1994 rolled around, it was 45,000. And by the time 1996 rolled around, it was one of the fastest growing towns back then. It had been lifted to 60,000. So with a small lot, I was non-conforming from the get-go. And there's special rules in place to help people with non-conforming single-family homes. So I looked at your section today. It's not bad. I think you've got some of the same ideas that I have. When you see the next memo, you'll see my suggestions. If you want to go through your stuff and pull something back out, I thought it was well thought out on your end, and maybe we compromise a little bit in terms of what finally gets put in the final draft. But like I said, this is the black hole of the Zoning Act, and it's very difficult to understand. The more you can simplify it for people, the better. Just as an example, if you don't use your property and it's non-conforming, you use the structure or make use of it for 2 years, you lose it. your protection gone. Well, why can't that be a little bit more flexible? Why can't you say, however, if you apply for a special permit to the ZBA and they decide it's worth keeping it alive, they can do that. And it'll still be a non-conforming use structure. And you could set a term on that for the next 3 years. So you get 5 years instead of 2 that way.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt again. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but this is you're hitting the sore points. We've discussed whether we should make that finding in each case. Many of our applications are for expansion of non-conforming uses or buildings, and we've noted in some we've asked the question specifically. In others, we take the word of the applicant that the building has been in this non-conforming use for the last couple of years, but we would like some clarification on that, and as to whether that's an affirmative for the applicant to show at the get-go. The bylaw's there, but you're hitting the sore point, so appreciate it on that.
I've actually taken a case from Salisbury Beach up to the Supreme Judicial Court years ago. Guy wanted to buy a tavern and convert it into a food court for people going to the beach, and they could park there and get a big lot. The tavern was in the ownership of a guy who died, and this was like Labor Day 1999. So for 2 years he chased the estate trying to get something to show that he could run a business out of there so he could use it within that 2-year period. And right at the very end, around July of 2001, August of 2001, he got a temporary food license. But I didn't know him at the time. If I had known he was in this pickle, I'd have had my whole family out there with movie cameras and balloons, and there would have been no doubt. There's a case from New York that says, if you have to use it, it was a mooring case. If you tie your boat up to it one day in the year, it's a 1 year, use it or lose it. You used it. We're on to the next year. But the pain of that was profound, because he didn't have, as a layperson, he didn't know what he needed to do. And then I inherited the case. I think when we went to the appeals court, they said, well, what did he do? And I said, well, he had stuff to sell, Your Honor. And they said, what? I said, well, he was a old vending machine with Coca-Cola, and there was a big can of beer nuts. They didn't buy it, so he used it for other purposes. But it was a shame. There are some good. I did Holyoke 25 years ago. If you were going to say use it or lose it within 2 years, well, they were 102 years past due. The whole area down on the river, which was the warehouse district, had been abandoned literally. Now it's a vibrant part of the community with live, work, and art studios. So there's some good ideas in there that can make this less painful than it needs to be. On definitions, I like to put them all in the back. Like I was looking at your water resource protection district and your floodplain overlay district, and there's a couple of pages of definitions in both of them. So the question for you is, do I keep them in the section on the overlay district, or do I pull them out of the overlay district and put them in the definitions in the back with a heading, for the purposes of section 9.1 floodplain overlay district, these definitions apply?
Yes.
My preference is to put them all in the back. But I'll bow to yours.
I agree. For one, I agree. We searched for the sign definitions just in the last year, thinking, well, they're in the definitions here. Where do they go? And then one of the members said, no, they're in the special signage section.
Yeah, no, I saw that too. There were quite a few sign definitions as well.
Yep. And
I'm facing this in Wakefield right now. They have a 25-page signage overlay district. They also have a regular sign bylaw. That applies in the bulk of town. The signage overlay district applies, when you look at a map of Wakefield, the overlay district is 3 measles, 1 north, 1 mid, 1 south. 25 pages in the bylaw for that, and the definition of signs goes on for 4 of the pages. So it can get...
Somebody got paid by the word, that's what happened there.
I don't know who wrote it, but they had plenty of time on their hands. I've never seen anything like it before. And then there's plenty of things that are not defined that are more use related, like research, technical labs, business, professional office. I think there's a definition of office, but break it out. Retail. A lot of towns have gone to a system where they've got neighborhood business, medium scale business, and then large scale business. You want to limit that. I did Stoughton a few years ago. They've got small scale businesses in their center, and as you go out on the route, what is it, 138 or 38?
138 or 27.
Yeah. And then restaurants have a lot of categories. Fast food drive-through, sit down. So something to think about. It's a chance for this to get clarified so that your poor building inspector doesn't have to guess every time. I see in the bylaw that he is referred to consistently as the inspector of buildings / building commissioner.
He wanted a big title.
Well, I honor that. I'm an honorary building inspector, so I am. I give a speech every year down the road from you in the at the exit for Bay Road. There's a little hotel on the right-hand side. That's where the Southeast Massachusetts Building Officials Association has its annual meetings, and I've given them a speech for a few years now. So whatever he wants to be called, just let me know, and I'll go through the bylaw and make those changes. In the use table, I will just start off with, you have a lot of animal rules. I like to handle those more with Board of Health regulations, and I can show you examples of good Board of Health regulations. And then agriculture often creates a problem. If you just say the farm is allowed, I don't remember what yours says, but if you just say farm, well, that's pigs and fur-bearing animals. You know what a farm is? There's a case from Sturbridge in which this guy had a barn in his backyard. His property was 7 acres, so he qualified. And people started to see trucks backing up to the doors and offloading stuff. And then the barking would start and the doors would close. He was growing dogs back there for them all. And the neighbor said, that's a kennel. It wasn't a kennel. Kennel's boarding somebody else's dogs. He was growing the dogs for profit. And he won the case. Also, a riding arena is agriculture per case law. We had a case last year in which a guy was similarly opening the barn door and outside as well in the summertime for bearded, what were they? Bearded something.
Bearded dragons?
No, they were lizards.
Bearded dragons.
Dragons.
Yeah, bearded dragons, yeah. It was in Oxford. And that was not agriculture according to the court, even though he was selling them at pet stores. So it's kind of a confusing thing. Be careful what you wish for. And then there's Dover Amendment uses as well. Dover, generally, I use the terminology from the statute and putting this in the use table. So that would be primarily religious uses, not just churches, primarily religious uses. For education, it's education operated by a religious institution or by a governmental institution or by a nonprofit. It has to be nonprofit. Think of Wheaton's probably simply just a nonprofit. And then child care has its own exception, which is different from the educational exception. Child care, for example, doesn't have to be nonprofit. So there are 3 things today that are governed by the Dover Amendment. We're headed for a 4th, and it's a dangerous one because you're already regulating in your bylaw, and that's solar. Chief Judge Piper at the Land Court has ruled that solar installations are entitled to the same protection as a church, which means you can't say no. Dover Amendment was about Dover saying no to churches in its residence districts. You're limiting, and most towns limit, large-scale ground-mounted solar farms in their 80,000 square foot district, if not more. So, to what extent can that stuff be regulated? That's a case that's working its way now, a question that's working its way now through the court. There was an SJC case.
So you think Tracer Lane is going to be expanded?
I don't think Tracer Lane is a very good teaching case because Waltham was limited to 2%. I mean, I could have told you that wasn't fair.
They gave the middle finger to the developer, yes.
Yeah.
That was going to be a question, if I could interrupt for 1 second. I was just going to ask, are we going to be able to add into this updating our solar bylaw like we've been talking about?
Well, I'm going to read it in great detail when we get to the non-residential stuff, and I'll tell you, and hopefully by then we'll get some additional guidance. Judge Roberts just ruled that she doesn't even go along with any of the Judge Piper perspective, and I think his case was from somewhere in southern Worcester County on Route 20. But he was very clear, if the legislature was going to take the time to do this, of course they didn't word it the same way, which has caused the problem. But if they're going to take the time to do this, it was the legislative intent to make this like a church or a school. And you can't say no to that. You can put reasonable conditions on it, but you can't say no. And Judge Roberts had a case in which a special permit was denied just recently, and she said that the special permit was appropriately denied. So that's somebody going off in their own direction in the current swing of things. I can tell you that if you put it on site plan review, big, medium, small, medium, and large, ground mounted, roof mounted, if it's all on site plan review, I can tell you that that's legal. Because that's what Judge Spicer said in the land court version of Trace and Lane. And I agree with him there. Now, that's not going to make towns happy. But until we get more instruction, that's about as good as I can guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see when we get to the non-residential uses. Yeah.
It's working its way through. I'm hoping they'll bail us out at the court.
And for Dover, the exceptions you mentioned, educational, religious, and childcare.
Yeah.
There's not one for disabilities.
Well, there are other things in the Dover Amendment, but for example, there's a prohibition of discrimination against disabilities. I don't think that's in the same balancing test that Dover has. So Dover it's ultimately a balancing test. Is the municipal regulation legitimate? And if it is legitimate, can the applicant claim that on balance it should not be enforced because it impairs the utility of the facility or it imposes enormous financial costs? That's essentially the balancing test. But you don't use that every time for discrimination. It's either discrimination or it's not. None of that is permissible. And it wouldn't pass the first test, that it's a legitimate exercise of municipal power. Okay. And there are other things in there like essential services, quasi-monopolistic things. Yeah. It's got 18, 20 subsections at this point in time.
Yeah.
And you got to remember with things like education, you can't put in there a specific definition because in my book I have a string site of things that have been approved as educational, and it's at least 16 or 17 things long. Counseling facilities that take in people with disabilities. You've got you can imagine kind of the last case I was particularly fond of was a place out in Worcester County where it was a Bible school. They came in the morning, they studied the Bible, and then they had lunch, and then they played capture the flag until they went to bed. Protected by the Dover Amendment? Yes. I've lost a case in Framingham in which a methadone clinic was given the protection as an educational use. 200 doses between 7 and 9 a.m. and then counseling from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The counseling was far less in terms of service, but per person, than the methadone administration. So I argued that the tail was wagging the dog. Then Judge Green looked at me at the land court and thought I was the most politically incorrect person he'd seen that day. And that's just the way the educational exemption works. There was a wonderful case out in Monterey this past year where a Christian ministry, not a church, it was a Christian group that had as its mission a camping ministry. So they wanted to organize camps for Christian people to come together to be religiously joined at the hip. And Judge Rubin at the land court took this apart in great detail and said, well, you can do this and you can do that, but you can't do this. For example, you can't have volunteers come in and sleep overnight because they may or may not share their religious belief. And when it got to the Supreme Judicial Court last year, they put it all back together and said the whole thing was exempt. So it's a moving target.
Okay. Sorry for sidetracking you.
Kind of interesting. I I'm putting a child care facility in right now in the city of Woburn, and it's always interesting. This is my second one. But I work for Primrose and Goddard Schools as for full disclosure. Wetlands Protection District, we had a conversation yesterday with the agent from the Conservation Commission. Yep.
Sorry, just going back to the use table. You made a reference on their drive-through. You say drive-in facilities weren't referenced and should require a special permit. We just refer to them as drive-through. You'll find them in the use table. And it's required for a special permit.
Yeah, I like that approach. I think every drive-through, whether it's at a dry cleaners or a CVS, ought to have a special permit attached to it.
Relatedly, Mark, the issue of deliveries from businesses. Every business, it seems, delivers now. I'm surprised I can get a sandwich here in Providence, and anyone will deliver it to me. Are deliveries coming up on the menu? Pardon the pun. In these definitions, business that also has a delivery component by the same business, for example, because that is traffic flow, of course.
Yeah, I think it's coming to that. My partner Jonathan Silverstein is the land use counsel for the city of Everett, and with the casino, it's a pretty popular place now. There's a lot of new construction and new residential construction, and I sat in for him one night when he couldn't make a meeting, and I watched as their board of appeals negotiated spaces in the front of the building where FedEx, everybody from the Grubhub, everybody had a place to park, because otherwise they were in somebody's parking space. And that was a condition of approval in the thing that I was witnessing that night. So I think you can incorporate that stuff in, and even require it in the bylaw, on top of the ordinary parking spaces that you would ask for in a big project. I had never thought about it before. I live in Concord, if somebody wants to deliver to me, they just have to weather my driveway, which goes down 24 feet to the road, from the road. That'll be over with on Monday.
Right.
So,
if you plow.
Luckily a builder owes me money, so we're good. All right, so I raised this is like a prequel to the wetlands protection bylaws adopted by town meeting and implemented by the Conservation Commission. And your agent told me with no doubt that there had been a couple of attempts to make it a wetlands bylaw, general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw, and that town meeting had rejected it a couple of times in the last few years. So I have no intention of taking it out with that wisdom now, but I would encourage you to just keep trying to knock on the door of getting town meeting to approve a general bylaw for this, because it goes a lot better.
Our town meeting always flows so smoothly.
Yeah, they're getting angrier, aren't they?
Mark, can I ask, was the conservation director in favor of that section falling under conservation and not planning for the special permit?
Well, I think he spoke with enthusiasm about the attempt to get it through town meeting. I got the feeling that he was rooting for it. I don't know that he lives. He said he lived in Berkeley, if I remember correctly. But I think it's it's been since 1978. That's been the standard approach.
Understood, but does a special permit granting authority need to be the planning board, or can we switch that to conservation?
No, conservation commissions cannot serve as a special permit granting authority under state law. It's either the board of selectmen, the board of appeals, or the planning board. So you'd have to put the entire thing in their bailiwick, and it would be a different approach.
Got it.
And under a local bylaw adopted as a general bylaw for wetlands protection, the appeal goes directly to Superior Court. Can't even go to land court. It goes to Superior Court, and it's handled as a matter of certiorari, which means that there's no trial. It's all done on the paper that was accumulated at the hearing in town hall. There's a whole different world out there. But many towns have done that because the wetlands regulations of the DEP have some gaps in them, and that's what they're trying to close. Okay, so parking refers to design review, but I didn't see any standards. But now that I've read section on site plan review with a fine tooth comb, I may have missed them. There were a lot of design standards in there. So I think what I'm going to recommend when we get there is to take that 5 to 10 pages out of site plan review and let it just sit there as a procedural device, which is really what it's meant to be, and put those 5 to 10 pages of objectives to be met. I think that's the way you say it in your bylaw. Back with parking, back with signs, back with lights, so that there are clear performance standards in one place that anybody applying for a special permit or subject to site plan review can start at the beginning of that section, walk through, and make a checklist out of it. Otherwise, I've got some in one place and some in another place. I don't see many earth material bylaws. I know you have an earth material general bylaw as well. No harm, no foul. I just and I know you're, from working in Berkeley all these years, I know soil removal has always been a bane to them. So probably not a bad thing. So this is the ZBA and the planning board. ZBA has its own section, and I've added a section in the draft that I prepared today for you next on the planning board. Short but sweet, but the planning board has two powers as I see. One is special permit granting authority, at least on some things, if not most things, and otherwise site plan review authority. So let's put that in there. You're equal to the ZBA and should have your own home. This is probably, I think we've covered this a little bit already. Special permit criteria, make it a balancing test, make it clear. There's some language in there, but I think this is, like I said, I'm very tied to this. I've used this for 30 years in my work. I can't think of anything I can't fit into one of those categories.
Mark, may I ask a question, please, with regards to number 6? I'm assuming if you've been using this for 30 years, it's been approved by the Attorney General and upheld in land courts.
Yep.
The one I'm asking about is in number 6 in terms
Yep.
of the fiscal impact. Interestingly, planning board just we're actually in the middle of reviewing one where abutters have made references to the fiscal impact on town services, and the attorney for that applicant has stated and actually cited some case law that basically states we can consider economic impact, but not necessarily fiscal, and specifically because 10.10 didn't allow for it. But he then went on to clarify that in the further, if we were to amend it to allow for the consideration of fiscal impacts on town services, the state or the land court would disagree with us, and he cited a couple of case studies. It was specific to schools and schools' ability to assume additional students, and the burden that it would place on school services, not other social services like fire and police. And I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, was it a 40B case?
It is not.
Okay. I mean, I think I think that first of all, my advice to any special permit granting authority would be, don't decide the case solely on the basis of number 6. I mean, find something in 1 through 5 to hang your hat on. What I'm really intending to do here, more than perhaps using it as a criterion for decision making, is to get you the information that you need. So, for example, if the project, just as an example, the Berkeley warehouses that I was describing before had issues. I mean, there was traffic issue, and the neighbors weren't happy with noise that might result. Having said that, it was $650,000 into the annual budget of the town, which is suffering from, like all towns, a need for more resources. So in the scheme of things, I think it's an important factor to be considered, but I wouldn't deny the special permit simply because I wanted $1 million and you were only giving me $650. And that's my usual speech on that.
Yeah, the abutter had cited, I think they said, a study that crops up every once and again, that a single-family house uses more in services than it generates in property tax revenue.
Yeah.
And the other attorney said, I've seen that 100 times, and you can't use that as a litmus test for a project because of case law X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I'd like to see X, Y, and Z. I don't disagree with the ultimate conclusion that the attorney offered, that you can't just fold your tent on that. I think that's, that's a little too narrow an approach.
His statement was that we were not allowed to consider it.
Well, I was Franklin's lawyer when we argued that we were entitled to have a school impact fee back in the heyday of Franklin's growth 20 years ago. And we had a lot of math behind our calculation of the fee. We backed off from what we could have charged. And at the end of the day, we lost the case because the state pointed out to us that in Massachusetts, the Constitution says education shall be free. So it's hard to reconcile that with the school impact fee. We should have done something different to start. Impact fees, by the way, are not covered by statute in Massachusetts. So it's home rule or bust, and we busted.
Thank you.
You bet. And if you can, I'd be really interested to see the correspondence if it's available for you to just PDF and send it to me.
Brian, can you get that to Mr. Bobrowski, please?
I'm not sure if they put it in there back and forth, if they just said it. I'd have to look.
It's in the Coogan Smith. They wrote up their attorney wrote up a memo on it specifically, and it does cite case law.
Okay. Well, I'm always interested in adding new information to my book, so.
Yeah, he makes reference to you can't consider fiscal impacts because fiscal is not included within 10.10 of our bylaws, and
that's one glaring problem that probably makes him right. But
but then he goes on to state, and even if he did have it, the two case laws he does cite, it is specific to school services only. It makes no reference to other tax or property tax scheme implications.
Well, I'd love to see it.
It's only school, sure.
Yeah. If anybody has a minute, send it over. I'm taking off for a long trip. I'm going to need reading materials. So.
Okay. Brian, you have that? You can get that to him, or do you want me to shoot it over to him real quick?
I mean, if you have it up now, Laura, you can shoot it because we're still using my laptop to.
No problem. I'll send it now. I had pulled it up specifically because of that, because I found it interesting.
Okay. I went through the job descriptions for the building department, or I should say the inspector of buildings / building commissioner, and there was a missing reference to the statutory 14-day to respond to a complaint from a neighbor. So I just added it in the draft that I prepared. I also gave you something to look at on non-criminal disposition, which allows the inspector to hand out a parking ticket. So if I'm mad at somebody in town hall and I want to use the $300 per day penalty, that's not as easy as it sounds. You've got to go to district court and get a magistrate to indicate that there's cause, and then go to a jury of 6, and that's how you get your money. Until then, you can't just fine somebody. Although I have been fined in an angry Hopkinton meeting once. And when my clients looked at me and said, can they do that? I said, no, but it'll cost you at least what the fine amount was to go to court to get it lifted. So the cheaper and simpler way to do it is to just hand out a parking ticket. It could be $50 for the first offense, $100 for the second, $200 for the third. And really not much of an appeal mechanism for the poor person who's gotten the ticket. And it tends to work well in the towns that use it. I saw that there's a new floodplain 2023 version. I downloaded that separately, so I'll take out the old one and put in the new one. The RPOD looks pretty modern. It hasn't changed much. DEP does put out models for that, but I looked at yours and I know the new model pretty well, so it looks pretty good. Site plan review, the one major change here, planning board members, is that I like the fact that I have an appeal directly to court. I'm the inventor of that about 25 years ago, after many arguments with the Attorney General's office. At the time, they didn't think that it was permissible for a board to create jurisdiction, but I persevered, and that provision has been now upheld by the appeals court, and the SJC has ruled in cases where it exists without comment. But Judge Foster, who I think is a great judge at the land court, had a case a couple of years ago, and he said, if you're going to do that, you should have a public hearing, because otherwise there's no record. And if it's going to go directly to court, the court's going to want to see the record to measure the local decision against. So I've taken the time to add it. In the materials I'm sending next, I've added a standard provision that says the public hearing has to follow the procedures in section 9 and 11, and you've got 90 days from the close of the public hearing, like a special permit, to file your decision with the town clerk. And that kind of gives you another procedure that you're familiar with to use for site plan review. No reason why you'd have to take 90 days. I've never seen any board take 90 days to make a special permit decision. But I do appreciate that you have moved it directly to court. I'd say it's about 1/3 of cities and towns have done that now, and maybe a little more, maybe like 40%. But it's a disaster if you don't do that, because you've got the time to appeal the site plan decision is when the building permit is applied for or denied, and that can be years later.
Mark, I have a question with regards to site plan review.
Yeah.
We also have a subdivision control law that's very old.
Yeah.
It is a separate document. It has its own set of design standards, which
Yeah.
don't necessarily align. I would just like to make sure we're going, and I think we're finding that applicants are not necessarily aware of the subdivision control design standards. And I'd like to find a way to make sure they're referenced within our bylaws so that applicants know to refer to other documents.
Well, it would depend on what kind of design standards they are. There are old cases from the appeals court that say that a subdivision rule and regulation package does not have authority to govern aesthetics. It's not a purpose announced for subdivision control in it. Section 81Q and 81M of the subdivision control law. So, for example, Tisbury said that there would be due regard for attractiveness of layout and preservation of this and that specifically was struck by the court in a case from Tisbury 20 years ago. Those things are and can be taken into consideration in zoning decisions, for the reason that zoning is home rule. You can do anything that's not inconsistent with or preempted by state law. Subdivision control is not home rule. It's Dillon's rule, which means you can only do what the legislature told you can do. And if it's not specifically mentioned in there, you're really not. You're wading into unknown waters. So I will look at the subdivision design standards, because I can get them online.
No, you can't.
You can't? They have to be online, don't they?
I don't think they've been digitized. They're literally from like 1950 something.
Oh wow, okay.
When I send you the letter, I'll attach them.
Okay. Yeah, the earliest they could be is like 1953, because that's when the current version of the subdivision control law took effect. The section you have on affordable housing has one fatal flaw, and that's you're requiring a subdivision with 6 or more lots to apply for the special permit so that you can then impose the affordable restrictions and get whatever money you're getting if it's a payment in lieu. In the Wall Street development case that I've highlighted there, a different issue was in play. The developer objected to what town was it? It was Westwood. Westwood had a provision that had any subdivision with more than 4 lots called a major residential development. And for any major residential development, you needed to apply for a special permit one plan that you submitted was an alternative plan that the developer was sure to hate, and the other one was a conventional plan that the developer really wanted to do. And then the planning board would pick, and usually pick the alternative plan, and that would be the way you went forward. A gentleman named Lou Petrosi, who was Wall Street Development, protested, and he sued, claiming, I get to subdivide if I comply with every subdivision rule and regulation, and you can't stop me. And he was right. That's the way the subdivision control law works. So putting major residential development on a special permit was illegal. And I think that the court would easily rule that putting any subdivision on special permit so that you can extract the affordable housing is just as illegal. I don't know where this conversation goes, but many towns do what you're doing. It's not unique to you, and they just don't get sued. But no, Westwood did. So it's not
Yet
like
is
you're
the operative word there, is what you're telling us.
Say it again.
Yet is the operative word.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Tewksbury, for example. I've worked a lot there. They have a payment in lieu in the alternative, and they usually get in the high ones, so 160, 170 as the payment in lieu. And the money's been put to great use. I mean, they bought down affordability restrictions on projects that might that would otherwise have lost, the enforceability of the regulatory agreement. So it's not like they're spending it on chicken barbecues. They're preserving affordable housing. But if they ever get sued, they're going to have to give the money back. That's the penalty if you have an illegal fee. And a payment in lieu in this case would be the result of the illegal special permit requirement. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, we've already talked a little bit about solar. And we'll hope that the court makes progress in terms of getting more answers for us. And then I've talked a little bit about...
I would say that for solar, Norton is it's a contentious issue, and I'll stop there because it doesn't need to go any further.
Yeah. Well, that's true in many places, and I've seen examples. I recall working on a project for some neighbors out in the center of the state, and one of my clients stood up and said, I get it. This could be green, but what you've got here is greed. And he was right. I mean, they were plunking down a solar farm right in front of the best looking houses in town, certainly, and it all went downhill from the houses to the solar farm. So it was their vista for now and evermore. And I thought he had hit the nail on the head. But this is something that the legislature has favored since the late I think the solar language was written in 1979 or 1989, one of the two, I can't remember which. And it isn't going anywhere. And it will either have a fourth element after agriculture, maybe the fifth, under Dover Amendment approach to these problems. So that's the agenda, if you will. When I get a chance to look at what I did today and clean it up a little bit tomorrow, I'm going to send Brian new sections 1, 2, that's short reading, 5 on nonconformities, and 10 on job descriptions. And I am going to look to you to tell me when we can next meet in February. I am going away on the 12th, and I wanted to do this before I go off the grid. I'm going to South America. So I'll be back in the office on February 5th. I'm going to suggest, is my wife listening? I'm going to suggest Valentine's Day.
I'm going to suggest not Valentine's Day because I like to live.
Okay. How about the 9th day? Oh, that's President's Day. How about the 20th?
I could ask when Valentine's Day is, and that'll
14th.
reveal.
It's always the 14th.
Is it? It's 14th, 15th. There's President's Day, MLK Day. I don't know.
Yeah.
Remember the old days when we got Lincoln's birthday and Washington's birthday off?
Yeah. But the week of the 19th is school and vacation week, so you may have some travel issues. And since we haven't identified necessarily our small group, that would be something to consider.
Well, another thing, I'll just throw it out there. I mean, if the answer is no, it's no. But in small groups, oftentimes we've had meetings, around 4, especially if they're Zoom. And I can easily do that almost any day. But as you can well imagine, my nights are still at this late stage of the game taken up with many meetings. I was out twice this week. So, if it works for you, it works for me. I think it's
Daytime is dependent on the day for me.
Yeah.
I'm on the other clock.
Yeah, I get it.
So go ahead, suggest a date, and I can comment.
Yeah, if it's late enough in the day, I can get away with it.
Define late enough.
Later in the afternoon, so if we can make it close to
5 o'clock?
5, yeah.
Well, I mean, I could even, like on the 8th, I'm going to be in Berkeley live, probably starting at 6:30. And it's just a short ride from you to there. Of course, the traffic sucks at that time in the afternoon, but that's probably a bad idea. The following week, I could do the 13th, but that's the only day I have open.
I believe the planning board has a meeting that day, unless I'm mistaken.
13th?
It's a
We did
Tuesday.
not. We did the 6th and the 27th.
27th, yeah.
Okay.
I do have another meeting, but I can break away from that. Well, if we were to do that at 5,
I could do
if we were
that.
done by 6:30, I'm good.
That would work. You want to try to sketch? You want to put that in?
That 13th? Yeah.
It's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you in for 5 o'clock on Tuesday, February 13th. And I'll get the memos out to Brian after I get one last chance to clean them up a little bit tomorrow. And you'll begin to see the formatting that I use to avoid, having to explain what we changed and what we didn't change over and over again. And I should say something about that too. This is a recodification. So you're going to hear people say, you can't change anything. This is just reorganization. It's not. I mean, if there's things that are wrong or not working, we're changing it. If I add definition, we're changing it. So I don't really think it's appropriate for anybody to take the position that we're not changing things. Otherwise, I'd just be a glorified stenographer, and I don't consider that my role here. Be brave. That's my point of view. We can always pull it out at the end. It's going to go through 3 drafts. If we lose a little bit of, ambition, it can always be introduced as a separate article. Just a piece of it can be a separate article at this town meeting coming up in the fall, or at the next town meeting coming up if it's too controversial. And you'll see.
Here's the bulk of it. Here's one thing that we wanted to break off separately and give town meeting an opportunity to debate specifically. That's not a bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if you have it in the main article, it's just going to drown the main article.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Thank you, Mark, for your input and your guidance here.
It's my pleasure. As I've said, this has been a labor of love and a big part of my career. I hope to make it entertaining. I've taught law for 28 years. I know how to make the class focus. And if I get you laughing here periodically, that's a fulfillment of a dream. So
We'll refer to you as the Rob Reiner of planning and zoning attorneys.
one of my students, they get the multiple choice bubble, and on the back you get to write something, and I turned it over, and his only comment was, "The man is a comic genius." And I was, okay,
Wow.
I'm ready to retire from that job, man.
High compliment, yeah.
So I did.
He turned that in after the final, right? I mean, that's
I'm going to make an observation. I hate the town email portal. I think we're supposed to communicate through that. If you can add my business personal email to your emails as well, that would be appreciated. It's simple. T Noel, T as in Tom, Noel as in Noel, at lawnoel.com, LAWNOEL. Because the portal, I can't deal with whatever that is, Microsoft messaging or whatever it is. Thank
It's
you.
not the normal Microsoft, yeah. It's,
Where's your office, Tom?
Providence. I'm in Mass and Rhode Island. I live in Norton, of course, but my office is in Providence, South Main Street, which is where I am. Can you see the papers behind me?
I'm looking for the cinema there, just down the street.
The cinema used to be it used to be the cable car right across from me.
And is it gone now? I drove it the other night. I didn't see it.
It was gone 3 years ago. I actually went on the website. It was I forgot what was playing there. I was going to go over there to see the movie, and it closed the day before. About it was during COVID. It might have been the year before COVID. It might have been 19. I don't remember. But right across from what used to be the cable car.
I lived on Arlington Ave below the Brown playing field for a few years. I loved it. It was great. My daughter went to Lincoln, so
Yep.
it was a way to be close. All right, folks, have a great weekend. And I'll send Brian a picture of some penguins while I'm gone. So
I don't know what that means, but yes, safe
it
travel.
means the second part of the trip is Antarctica.
Means it's going really fast, Sal.
Oh, that's a boat ride.
Yeah,
Great. Have fun.
kind of scared about the boat ride, but we'll survive.
We hope.
Thanks. My observation, Mark, this was a small group and it worked.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need a small group, but
No, I think it's fine.
we'll go from there.
But we're going to start making decisions, and this is fine. I think this is fine. Yeah.
Good night.
Great. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Have a good one.
Do we need a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman?
we probably should.
So
You
moved.
don't have quorum, Tom, so I think you're good. But
Jim, I always ask Jim to make the motion.
I can't make the motion though, can I?
I guess we don't have a quorum, so we're illegally meeting. I'm not sure. I'll see you at the pub.
Exactly.
Good night.
I'm on dry January. I drank too much during December.
That's... I don't sign up for that. Good night.
Alan,